If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
This is Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where we talk about people who cheat and lie instead of people who beat you till you die. I'm Greg Kite.
And I'm Caleb Newquist.
So, Caleb, quick question. Have you ever
Yes.
been disappointed by someone you admire? And it could be anyone that you admire, like a relative, a celebrity, a boss, a coworker, an Instagram influencer, me, a behavioral economist. Who have you been disappointed with?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a very annoying answer before I give you an actual answer. Is that okay?
Yeah. Start.
Okay.
I would expect no less.
Okay, great. My annoying answer is that I don't really put people on pedestals, so I don't really admire them. I think I try to admire like what they do versus admiring the person, right? So I admire their work, but I probably, somewhere in the back of my head, something tells me they're really fucked up somehow. Like, you know, they're a narcissist or they're abusive or they're just a jerk or greedy or whatever. And that doesn't necessarily mean I don't like them. In some cases, I probably would like them, but I just know that they're human and like humans are messy. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. And I don't really have a good explanation for why I am like that. Like, you know, maybe it's because, you know, it happened, maybe my attitude changed like after my parents got divorced and I learned it's like, oh, they're human beings, not just my parents, like one of those kind of things. But also, you know, just over the course of my life, I feel like I've just read about and watched a lot of different prominent and admired people just fall from grace in the most catastrophic ways. And I guess I'm just like, you just have to kind of separate like their achievements from humanity, right? So like, wow, very impressive thing you did there, human being with a multitude of flaws. That's kind of how I have to think about it. You know, like if you think about
right. So kind of the Caleb Newquist trademark jaded view of the world is really what you're talking about.
I can't enjoy anything, I guess. Or I can't enjoy anyone. Right?
Yeah.
Like Lance Armstrong. Like I'm sure someone out there is thinking, Lance Armstrong, and I'm just like, fuck that guy. I never liked him. And like when he turned out to be a cheater, I was just like, yeah, of course. Like or like Bill Cosby, like something like that. You know, you're just like, you're just like, holy shit. Like that's the kind of stuff where you're just like, man, people.
Right.
You know?
Good point. For some reason, Bill Cosby is one of those things where it's like, oh yes, everyone, regardless of everyone might be a monster.
Yeah. But I'll be a good sport. I want to be a good sport. So I will tell you, like, for me, I think like when Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were both implicated in the steroids scandal for Major League Baseball. You remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I do remember that. Yeah,
that to me was pretty disappointing. I loved baseball as a young person. And I remember the season where they were both chasing Roger Maris's home run record. And it was just, I mean, it was such a thrilling baseball season to watch them do that. And like, they both broke the record, you know, and all the steroids, stuff, it fucking ruined it. It just ruined it, you know, after that.
Right.
And it was just like, I just never looked at those guys the same way ever again. I don't know if that's when I basically quit liking baseball too, but I mean, it probably had some kind of a impact, but anyway, that's my official answer.
I thought you were about to say, that's when I started realizing that everyone's got flaws. And I was like going, oh, so it wasn't your parents' divorce. It was Major League Baseball. It was a couple of roided out guys hitting some dingers that ruined the world for you. Not your own personal tragedy.
I mean, even the parents thing is probably a factor. Yes.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that rings true, I think, for a lot of people where
for
it's
sure.
Like, oh, yeah.
Because
Mom and dad are gods until they're not. Yeah.
Right. And most people who have a shred of self-awareness at some point they realize that their parents are like human beings that are just like are just muddling along through life the best they can, like the rest of us.
And usually that's when you become a parent yourself. You're like, oh shit, this is hard.
yeah. But in my case, it was like when my parents, separated, I was just like, well, shit, okay,
and then nothing's stable.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. But also just like that. People are human, and they change over time, and they move, and they change, and they move on, and whatever. So,
right.
What about you, Greg? What about you?
Well, me, it wasn't my parents. I was disappointed by a behavioral economist.
Oh my God,
Caleb.
What? How did you come up with a nerdier answer than me?
I know it was funny because I was busting your balls before the show about how nerdy you came off with your answer. And then I realized right after that, I was disappointed by a behavioral economist.
Yeah.
I win the nerd prize. But yeah, his name's Dan Ariely. We've given countless ethics webinars that have relied heavily on his research. I don't, and like legit, I do not plagiarize his work, but I cite him so often it feels like I plagiarize his work.
There were times when we were presenting the material, and I'm just like, are we giving him enough credit? I don't know if we can give him enough attribution credit for the stuff that we're passing off as ethics CPE.
Yeah, if the webinar was titled Greg and Caleb present Dan Ariely's original research, that might have been the proper credit. There was one time, it wasn't a webinar you were on, but there was this one webinar where I had two co-presenters, so it was three of us total, and we actually turned it into a drinking game on webinar, where every time if any one of us said the name Dan Ariely, me and my co-presenters had to take a shot. Well, me and one of the co-presenters had to take a shot. The third guy, he was Mormon, so he had to take a sip of his juice box. But that's as hard as we could get.
So how did that go? Like, were you under the table in like 5 minutes? Like, what happened?
No, we pretty quickly realized that we could get around it by just not saying his actual name. So the behavioral economist that we keep talking about, but it was, we were pretty loose. That's for sure. In that episode.
Nice.
But also the birthplace of my other podcast, my limited series podcast, Drunk Ethics, was the idea for that was born that day.
Right. Oh yeah. Very nice.
Yeah.
Now remind me.
I know.
You met Dan Ariely once. Is that right?
I did. It was not like meeting him. I didn't meet him face to face, but it was better than like a virtual meeting. On my previous podcast that I was on, we got to interview him because the guy that I was a co-host with, I think he just asked a lot of people if they'd come on, and it was surprising how many said yes. So Dan Ariely was coming on our podcast. I was super excited, and like a true fanboy, I was hoping that I would be so funny and so insightful during the podcast that he was a guest on that he would be like, we must do a project together.
Right.
Greg, it's like if I can just meet Britney Spears, she'll know that I should be one of her dancers. It was kind of like that. Like in hindsight, I realized that's where I was going with the whole thing.
And so did he ask you to work together?
No. Absolutely no. Listen, it was so bad because during that podcast, not only did he not find me funny or insightful, I'm pretty sure he thought that I was a dick because
Did he say, you're a dick?
No, he never said. He never was like, "Hey, shut up, you dick." It wasn't that. And I can't, and the funny thing is, it's been long enough that I can't remember exactly what he did. I don't think he said anything. I think it was just kind of more like how he would respond to me.
Overall,
but it was clear,
dickish tone coming from him.
Yeah, coming from that's what it felt like. Well, he's a college professor, and it very much felt like the teacher who was trying to put the kid who was disrupting the class in his place. That's kind of how I felt. Where it was
Okay.
He was kind of like going, "Hey, I think I know I know that you think you're funny, but how about you just shut the fuck up and let me talk about the book that I just published?" So that was more the vibe that was coming off of him.
Don't meet your heroes, right?
Right. Well, that's the thing. And so when we say, so the question was, have we ever been disappointed in some kind of celebrity or someone we looked up to? I definitely looked up to him. And so I was disappointed in him in that never meet your heroes kind of way.
Right. Yeah.
But then even more recently, I was disappointed in him all over again because, like I said, the dude's done a bunch of research on ethics, and I've relied heavily on that research in a lot of the stuff that I've done, a lot of the presentations I've given. And recently, it was discovered that one of his main papers that, like an academic paper that was published for the National Association of Sciences, big fucking deal paper, it was discovered that that paper was built on false data. And so the guy who's like he's like the ultimate in ethics research committed fraud in his ethics. He committed ethics fraud.
Yep.
Like that's a weird, there's a lot there in just that the words ethics fraud.
Yeah.
The dude lied, or at least, and I guess let's be clear. He's at least been accused of lying about his research on how to prevent people from lying. That's what he did.
And
it
correct me if I'm wrong, but like the work that you're talking about that you based a lot of your ethics presentations on, you're not like the only person who relied on this work. Like this particular paper that he had several co-authors, but he was like, he's the guy who went out and wrote a book about it, like a best-selling book about it. But the paper itself in the academic world was extremely sought out and cited like hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Right? Like the citation numbers are pretty remarkable. And so you weren't the only person who found it to be compelling that found the findings to be compelling.
Yes,
right?
I was one of a myriad of people who were extremely disappointed by someone we looked up to. He disappointed a lot of us.
Right.
And so with that, today's episode is going to be a bit of a unique one for Oh My Fraud, because we are going to be looking not at fraud in financial statement, not at embezzlement. We're going to be looking at fraud in academia, and we're going to specifically be looking at the ethics of ethics research. So, Caleb, do you remember?
Yes.
What was your first exposure to Dan Ariely? Do you remember?
I do. My first exposure to Dan Ariely was basically the homework that you assigned to me for the first ethics fraud we ever did together, which was many, many moons ago now. And so, yeah, that was my first.
I thought you knew about him before that.
I don't think so. Like, I'd have to think about it, but I don't recall.
Okay.
Like, I didn't have any of the books. Maybe I'd come across it, but you were like, when I remember asking you, it's like, oh, how do you want me to prepare for this? Because I was basically hosting and you were presenting the material, and we were doing like you were doing one of those 2-hour ethics marathons that we did at the end of the year. And anyway, so I read the stuff that you wanted me to read, and I liked his writing style, and I thought the experiments were interesting, and the findings were obviously made sense, but they're also kind of eye-opening. But it definitely, in terms of like me starting to like form some thoughts around behavioral ethics, like it definitely shaped my early thoughts around it. But I am by no means a fanboy like you, Greg. So what's your Ariely origin story or whatever?
So my first exposure to Dan Ariely was his very popular TED Talk on behavioral economics. You can still find it on YouTube. I believe that he presented that in 2008. It was, there's TED Talks that are flops and there's TED Talks that kind of go viral, and his was one of the ones that kind of went viral. It's interesting you talking about how you liked his writing style. He's a great speaker too. Very, very engaging. And I'm not prone to use the adjective impish, but I feel like that's a great way to like describe not just like his presentation style, but also like you were saying, the actual experiments that he does. They're a little twisted. And that's fun. It's fun to listen to what he does where he's kind of fucking with the people, his subjects for his experiments.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was very, I would say very playful and just like interesting.
Yeah.
Like it made like the process of gathering data, it made it seem like, oh, I could do that. That sounds fun. I want to do that. It's like most of the time that's not how it's done, so pretty novel and kind of innovative, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so that was my gateway to Dan Ariely. Then I read his book, Predictably Irrational. I'm going to say that's his biggest book that he's done. And I freaking loved it. I thought, and I still think that it's if not the best business book I've ever read, it's one of the best business books that I've ever read. Has great information on things like pricing and marketing and persuasion, but even like bigger picture, it feels like it's not this is a little grandiose, but it feels like it covers all of human behavior as it relates to business.
Yeah, right.
And like you said, a lot of his findings were very counterintuitive too, where you would go, oh, I thought that was going to go this way, but it actually went that way. And then he'd explain his theories for why. And it was very eye-opening, like you said. But then 2 of the chapters in Predictably Irrational were that I found particularly engaging, but they did also seem like they were a little bit out of place in a business book, is the 2 chapters that he had in that one about ethics. So then, funny story, when we had him on the podcast, me and my co-host, obviously we were both very excited to have him on there. I think me more than my co-host. And we had both read Predictably Irrational. We loved it. And so we were excited to talk to him about that. We had all these questions about Predictably Irrational, but he clearly came on the podcast because he had a new book that he'd just released called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. So he did not want to really engage with us about Predictably Irrational. He kept forcing the conversation from where we were trying to go back to his new book that and of course,
that media training pays off.
Is that what it is? Is it
of
the
course.
Media training that was coming through?
It's media training, probably.
Well, one way or another, the guy knew he had to push some books, and he would, and to his credit, he was very successful at doing that because I purchased a copy of The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Sold.
In fact, if my numbers are right, I purchased the physical book, the ebook, and the audio book, and I think I'm almost positive I've actually purchased not 1 but 2 copies of the physical book because I keep loaning it out and not getting it back from people that I loan it to. Do you have a copy?
That's weird.
Do you have a copy of The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, Caleb?
I think I can see it from here, actually.
Yeah, I think that's my copy of The Honest Truth About Dishonesty, you bastard.
Well, I told the truth. I'm not being dishonest about it.
That's true. I guess it worked. But and funny story. Like right now, because I used to, when we do webinars, I would like to use them as like props. So I'd be like, so and I'd lift up. I go, so in the book, the Predictably Irrational, I'd pick that one up and show it to the camera, and same with The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Yeah.
But now, like, I can't find either of them anywhere in my home. So, and I looked for them in preparation for this podcast.
Oh, come on.
And they're missing. And so I put them on my Christmas list for this Christmas, but it's nice because first off, putting a book about ethical behavior on your Christmas list is kind of like, if I have been ethical, if the book really sunk in and I have been ethical, then I think that means Santa will bring them to me.
Yes,
which
right.
is a bonus. It's like he's like he taught me how to get what I want from Santa. So
Right.
that's a bonus. But also the fact that I've made multiple purchases of his books helps me feel a lot less guilty about my not plagiarism but near plagiarism of
Right.
his work.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about Dan Ariely's research into ethics is that it's all about discovering like the conditions and the circumstances that he's found that encourage ethical behavior. Like, for instance, a couple of the ones that I love the most, or that I've leveraged the most in my webinars and blog posts and podcasts and things like that. One of them is how social identification impacts ethical behavior.
Whoa.
Wait,
whoa. What is social identification, Greg?
that is, well, I think the best way to show it is from one of his experiments. So I guess quickly, the way that he would test people's ethical behavior is that he would give them a quiz that was like a math quiz, and the math wasn't hard, but it was very time consuming. Kind of like it's like mining for Bitcoin, but humans have to do it. It's like that. But it was a timed test. And then he would pay you he'd pay you a certain amount of money for every correct answer that you got. And he knew that he was definitely not giving people enough time to answer all the questions.
Right.
But he also would, and this is how, so he had some control groups to figure out, just for a large sample of people, what the average score would be for this math test, this time math test. And then he repeated the experiment, but in the repeated experiment, he allowed people to not only grade their own paper, but then shred their quiz and all, like, any evidence that they had of what their actual results were. And then they'd just go to the proctor and say, oh, I got this many right. And then they'd get paid. So he got the average score from the control group, and then did it where where cheating was possible. And he saw that, like, the average score in the normal condition, the control condition, was like 7 out of 20, right, in the time he gave him. And then when he allowed cheating, that's it went up from 7 out of 20 to 12 out of 20. And there's a lot to unpack there that we don't have time for. But then he kept tweaking with that even. Mm-hmm. And this was a very fun experiment that he did, where he hired an actor to go in to be part of the cohort that was taking this quiz. And the actor had this one job where it was like, after like 30 seconds or 60 seconds or something like that, the actor was just supposed to very publicly stand up and go, hey, I'm done and I got them all right. What do I do now? And the proctor was like, well, go over here and you get paid and then you go home. And so he'd go and get paid. And everybody, and you think about that, if you had like 20 minutes for this test, and on average people are getting 7 of these right, then this guy's saying he got all of them right in less time than most people have even solved one of them. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so when that happened, so I guess, Kayla, you probably remember this. Do you remember what happened to cheating when they saw this person act that way?
I think it went up. It went up, right? The occurrences of cheating. They increased. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It went from 12 to 15 is what it did because the idea there was, and this is where the social identification happens, is that they said, okay, even though it's this ad hoc group of people who are all getting this, taking this quiz, they're like going, oh, okay, so we assumed everybody would be cheating, and I just saw this guy cheat, so I guess it's okay to cheat. So I'm going to cheat. I'm not going to cheat as much as that guy did, but I'm still going to cheat some. So I'm going to cheat just to 75%, not 100%, because I'm not a bad guy.
Yeah, I'm not a monster.
I'm just going to cheat a little. It must be expected for us to do this because the proctor didn't, So it's kind of this ad hoc association with this group where it's like, oh, so in this group, here's how we behave. The funny tweak that he did on that then is because I think in the TED Talk, because he did a TED Talk about this basically the same information that was in the Honest Truth About Dishonesty book. In that TED Talk, he said that he did the same experiment at the Cornell campus that's in Pittsburgh, and he had the actor wear a sweatshirt from the University of Pittsburgh, from Pitt. And so when the actor stood up, he was wearing this very loud, obvious sweatshirt that's like, I'm not from this campus. And he did the exact same thing. And when he did that, he found that cheating went down because, again, it was this social identification where it was like, we're all Cornell students, and this fucking guy from Pitt just comes because they're all dicks. And he was like, we're not dicks here at Cornell. We're cool. So fuck that guy and fuck cheating. I'm going to give him my right answer. And that's so he showed how social identification impacts ethical behavior very clearly with those
very
experiments.
Interesting. For what it's worth,
I love it.
Cornell is not in Pittsburgh, but
it's not.
No, but it's not.
But
the effect is the same. The effect is the same.
Yeah. Okay. I swear he said Cornell.
It might be Cornell. Cornell is probably not. Cornell is, I think, it's somewhere in New York, and so it's probably not actually far from Pittsburgh. It's probably not far from Pittsburgh.
Okay. Maybe that's what it is. Matt, there you go.
Maybe this is important. Maybe I shouldn't be correcting you during the podcast, but I know someone will try to correct us at some point. So I thought I would save you the embarrassment of some nasty email, which I know Greg is sensitive about. So in any case,
I'm so sensitive.
Let's move. But Greg,
we already
what?
Well, I just want to say we've already demonstrated that our geography shit from our
geography's not good. Yeah, we have a history of spotty
so.
geography. But anyway, so the social identification, that makes a ton of sense. Mm-hmm. Then the self-image is the other thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I've heard you talk about this many times, but what's a real short description of how the self-image bit worked? It was the sunglasses, right? The sunglasses.
Well, no, we can get there even faster than the sunglasses. So when the cheating, so even, we even got into it a little bit with the guy who had the Pitt sweatshirt on with the Cornell students. I'm going to double down on the fact that they were Cornell students.
Fine.
Even when the guy wasn't wearing the sweatshirt from the opposite campus, he stood up and he said, I got a 20 out of 20 on this test. Give me my money. I'm out of here. That's basically what he said.
Yep.
And then as a result of that, the average score for cheating went from 12 to 15. It didn't go from 12 to 20. And when I give my ethics presentation live, I'll often be explaining these things. And even when I say the control group had an average score of 7, and then I said, what do you think happens when cheating's possible? People in the audience are always like, it went to 18, it went to 19, it went to 20. And I go, It actually went to 12 is what it did. And then it's like, why don't people go, why doesn't everyone swing for the fences and go, oh, I can cheat and there's no consequences for my cheating and stealing? And it's because we want to have a self-image of ourselves being ethical people, which is why when the guy not wearing the Pitt sweatshirt, but when he just seemed like he was like the same as everybody else, when he said, I got 20 out of 20, the cheating only went to 15 because the idea is that you can still have a self-image that says, hey, I'm a good person, I'm an honest person, because I know I could have cheated to 20, but I had the self-control to just stop at 15. That's how self-image impacts ethical behavior. So I think it's fascinating, it's brilliant, it's eye-opening. And it's counterintuitive as well. Yep. So that's all the stuff that kind of like I was talking about. There was 3 specific tweaks. So we talked about the tweak where he had this actor come in. There was 3 other tweaks on his research that I think are fantastic. So again, it's in the environment where cheating is possible. Before he gave him that math quiz that I talked about, this was in one set of experiments that he did. So before giving him the math quiz, he said, hey, we're going to do this thing that you're really here for. But before we do that, I need everybody you have a piece of paper in front of you, just real quick, brainstorm as many of the 10 commandments as you can think about.
Yep.
And he's like, no reason, don't worry about it. Just brainstorm the 10 commandments.
Just for
fun.
And
so they break, just, cause we do, we do that. It's, because this is Cornell, which is a Christian university. I don't know if it is or not. But anyway, so they brainstorm the 10 commandments, and then they go and take the quiz, where cheating is possible again. And what he found, do you remember what the result was from brainstorming the 10 commandments?
Yeah, as I recall, cheating went down.
It not just went down. Ariely reports that it was eliminated, that the average score went back down to the 7.
Okay, gotcha.
Not just reduced. Eliminated.
It met essentially it was the same as the control group.
Exactly.
Right.
So then he has another another group that he talks about where there was people who were self-professed atheists, and before taking the math quiz, he forced them to swear on a Bible that they wouldn't cheat on the math test.
That's kind of fun.
It's hilarious. I mean, again, impish. That's what that's where I think this guy's impish. And to me, again, counterintuitive. I go, okay, you're forcing atheists to swear on a Bible that they're not going to cheat. And, and just like the stereotypical, the stereotype we all have of atheists, they'll be like, I'll show you making me swear on a stack of Bibles that I'm not going to cheat. I'm going to take all your fucking money. But what he found was the opposite, is that it eliminated cheating again.
Oh.
And then the third one, and this is arguably the best one out of them, and this is a big deal too for the rest of this podcast, is one of the other things that he did is before people took the math quiz where they would get paid for the right answers, he had, and this was when he was at MIT conducting the experiments at MIT, he had people sign a piece of paper that said, I understand that the following quiz falls under the umbrella of the MIT Code of Ethics, and then they had to sign their name. Yep. And then they went and they took the quiz, and again, he found that signing a statement of honest intent prior to taking the quiz also eliminated cheating. And what makes that so wonderful is that MIT does not have a code of ethics. He had them sign a paper for saying that they were he lied to them about there being a code of ethics that they were signing that helped them to not to lie. So again, I just go, this guy's a lot of fun. I want to hang out with this guy, and he doesn't want to hang out with me. He thinks that I'm a dick. Yeah.
So going back to those atheists for a minute, I have to imagine that the atheists are like, making me swear in a fucking Bible. I'll show you who's fucking ethical. Me, the atheist who doesn't believe in anything. I can just hear the fucking gears turning in their heads.
That's a good point. Yeah. Instead, it could. Yeah, I guess that's obviously the way it probably went. And the funny thing is what that really was, and his explanation for that is that when you require someone to reflect on a moral code before they have the opportunity to lie or cheat, the question that's being asked of them is, subconsciously or consciously, it's like, oh, yeah, there's ethics out there, and am I an ethical person? And you want to go, yeah, I think of myself as an ethical person, and then you do something where your ethics could be, you could fall short of your own standards, but you don't, because you were just reminded, oh, I want to not to do that.
Right.
Did that make sense at all?
Yeah.
In a very non-succinct way.
Which is fine. Which is fine.
Sense. Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
So
the longer we take, the more CPE people can earn.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned the MIT signing the code of conduct, the non-existent code of conduct, by the way. That's important for the rest of this podcast. So let's go on. Tell me what that's about, Greg.
So that experiment was kind of that was sort of a layman's version of an experiment that Ariely and several co-authors conducted, and that they used the data from that to publish the very widely received, very influential, and not to mention peer-reviewed study that we were talking about before that was based on this fake data. The study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Like I said before, it was published in 2012, and so the MIT experiment was very similar to the experiment that Ariely got busted for. And so what that study, the 2012 study, what it reported or what it was looking at is it was the hypothesis was that dishonesty can be reduced by asking people to sign a statement of honest intent before providing information. And the whole thing was like, we want to make sure, we want to see the difference in people's honesty if they have to sign the statement of honest intent before providing information versus signing the statement of honest intent after providing the information.
Yep.
And the way that they did this is that Ariely specifically, he was in charge of this portion of the paper. He teamed up with an insurance company because my insurance company's never made me do this, but I know that one of the things they want to know typically is how many miles you're driving on your car in any given year. Is that something your insurance company requires of you, Caleb?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yep. Sounds familiar.
Mine does not.
I mean, I
They
can't
don't
remember.
care.
I can't remember the last time. Well, I remember there's questions about, just like questions like, do you commute to work? But then, overall, like how many miles do you drive in a year? Because they figure the more you drive, the more you have a greater chance of being in an accident, right? So that makes you a higher risk.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the what are they? What are those guys called that do all the data stuff?
Well, like
the
an actuary.
The actuaries love that stuff. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Because there's all these variables and they plug it into a formula and say, that's what your premium is, right?
Exactly. Yep. Precisely. So what they have, so there's certain insurance companies who ask their policyholders on an annual basis how many miles that they've driven on that specific car in the previous year. Yep. So before they were engaged to participate with Ariely in the study, they already had baseline, and they had the people's responses from the prior year. And then for the current year, they're saying to half of them, they say, okay, before you do this, we just want you to sign the statement of honest intent before you fill this out. The other half, they had them sign a statement of honest intent after they reported the number of miles on their car or cars, because make sure you remember a lot of people, well, like Caleb, how many cars does your family have insured with the same insurance company?
We have 2.
Okay, and I've got 3. So in the study, they had people. Apparently, there was just people with 1, 2, 3, or 4 cars, and obviously, there were fewer with 4 than there were with 3. And then I can't remember. I think there might have been about the same number of people who had 1 and 2 cars. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe a little fewer people with 2 cars than with 1 car. But regardless, they had baseline data where they weren't asked to sign any sort of anything.
Yep.
So they had the baseline data for all of their policyholders, and when they had what Dan Ariely and his cohorts found was that the group of people who had to sign the statement of honest intent before reporting their mileage, that those people on average reported 2,400 more miles than the people who signed the statement of honest intent after providing their mileage. So since more mileage dings you and less mileage is in your favor, the assumption is that by signing the statement of honest intent before providing the data, and those people gave data that was not in their favor, that those people were being more honest than the people who signed the statement after providing their mileage. Does that make sense, Caleb?
It does. So in other words, as you pointed out, more mileage, probably a higher car insurance premium, right? Mm-hmm. But if you ask someone to say, if you have them sign something that says, I attest that the information provided is accurate to the best of my knowledge and under the penalty of perjury against an insurance company or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that meant that people who signed it before they answered the question, it suggests that they reported a higher but more truthful and accurate number of miles.
Yeah.
Right.
If it was
and
going to
if they
hurt
signed
you,
after,
you were,
and if they signed,
you were telling the truth.
Yeah, and just keep me honest, but like, since that's a theme here, did they also have people? Did they have another group that signed after they provided the mileage also?
Yes. Yeah.
They did.
So they had. So there was only two groups of people who signed before and people who signed after. They didn't have, as far as I know, there wasn't a control group that didn't sign anything.
I thought
likely
saying,
there was.
But what did you say? You said there was just a baseline. There was just a baseline of insurance customers that said, these people don't sign anything, and this is what they report.
No. Good. Glad you asked that. So to clarify, no, they had the baseline mileage from the prior year for all these same people. So every year they have to report their mileage. So they had kind of the starting mileage. So they were basically like, what does your odometer say right now? Here's what it said last year. What does it say right now? Yeah. So that's where, and the prior year for the baseline mileage, they didn't have them sign any kind of anything because that was not a year that they were doing this experiment for.
Got it. All right. So the authors of the 2012 paper published a follow-up paper in 2020 titled "Signing at the Beginning versus at the End Does Not Decrease Dishonesty." And this was also...
they said... So in this next paper, they said the opposite of what they said at the beginning in the 2012 one.
Correct. And it was also... Okay. It was in the same journal, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So I don't know if it amounts to retracting their work, but it certainly contradicts their prior findings. Right? Because they didn't. Did they end up retracting the paper, the original paper at that point?
Not at this point. Not when they published the follow-up paper. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's part of the scientific process. Is you go, hey, we did these experiments back in 2012, and they showed us this data, and now in 2020 we're doing similar experiments, and in some cases the same experiments, and we're getting different data from this. So I think you're not necessarily, you don't have to retract the old experiments. You just say, oh, we had different findings this time.
It kind of expands your findings, right? Like it kind of, right. It isn't. I mean, you have contradictory findings, so you report that you have contradictory findings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an academic. I don't do this for a living. So, but I mean, that's my general understanding of it.
Right. So maybe,
layman's
understanding. So I think. So maybe saying it retract. I mean, I think for us, we would think of it as a retraction of their original findings, but it's more like saying, hey, before we said that this did impact it, now we're finding that it doesn't so much. So we don't. So I guess we really don't know necessarily. Results are inconclusive. I think that's maybe what they're. Right. More than a retraction of the prior work. Like you said, it's adding to it. It's kind of giving some nuance to it and saying, hey, we were pretty clear it did this one thing before, and now we're seeing that it's the opposite. So we're still not totally sure.
Right. So in the 2020 study, they also released a significant portion of the raw data that they used in 2012. And so because this raw data was made available, some other academics, some very bored, but very, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm
engaged?
Looking for? No,
very,
maybe
very power hungry, very
enterprising. Maybe
there you go. Good, enterprising.
Yeah. Some other academics who are obviously really into data. You know, they're data dorks, data geeks.
Right. Yeah.
They run a blog called Data Colada, and they dug into the raw data that was provided for the 2012 study, specifically the data from an experiment that was conducted by Dan Ariely and his co-authors, and they concluded that there was very strong evidence that the data was fabricated. So, Greg, your ethics research hero was caught being unethical.
Right. Marking the second time that he disappointed me.
Yeah, because the first time he was just a dick to you. And the second time it's
Yeah.
because he was a goddamn hypocrite.
That's right. And we've talked about before that there's very little patience for hypocrisy. And what makes it even worse, though, is that, even after he was a dick to me, I still really respected him
Sure.
and his research. So the fact that he disappointed me twice, but I didn't lose respect for him, that also means that the universe cheated me out of a really good role in Schadenfreude.
Right.
I don't get to enjoy.
Right, because if you had been real mad and said, "Oh, I don't like that guy anymore," and then
right,
and then then you would have learned about this and be like, "Yes," but instead
that's right,
you're kind of
motherfucker.
You're like, "Oh, I'm double. This is double disappointment, Dan."
Exactly.
Oh man. And there's a whole lot more that we need to unpack in this case of the unethical ethicist. Not the least of which is the fact that even though it looks like that Dan Ariely did it, he may not have done it, Greg.
And that's right. And we don't have enough time in a single episode to get into all of that side of this case.
Right. So this is a first for Oh My Fraud. We're going to have our very first 2-part episode.
That's right. And next time we will look into exactly what problems Data Colada found and what all those problems mean.
We'll also take a look at Ariely's public responses to the scandal because he said some things about it.
He did, and they were very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot to unpack even with that. So that's it for this episode, guys. And remember, when you meet your heroes, be a dick to them before they have a chance to be a dick to you.
That's great advice. And also remember that if you force an atheist to swear on a Bible, he can't tell a lie until you say his name 3 times. It's just science.
If you want to drop us a line, send an email to ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com and we will get it. And Caleb, where can people find you out there in the ether?
On Twitter at @CNewquist and LinkedIn / Caleb Newquist.
3 backslashes and then Caleb, no one's going to find you.
That's right, 3 backslashes. Greg, how do people get a hold of you on the internet?
Also on Twitter @Greg Kite and also LinkedIn, it's LinkedIn / Greg Kite.
Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kite and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. If you like the show, leave us a review or share it with a friend. It helps people find the podcast. Also, be sure to subscribe on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And for the accountants out there, if you listen to the podcast on Earmark, you can earn free CPE. Totally ethical. Totally
Absolutely.
ethical. Join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say, "Oh my,
Oh my fraud."